Montgomery County 911.
My girlfriend, I think, overdosed.
It started with a routine dental visit and ended with a 25-year-old beauty queen found lifeless on the floor of her boyfriend's home, a respected doctor twice her age. What really happened to Sarah Harris? Was it addiction, suicide, or something far more sinister? This is just another true crime story. This is the full breakdown of one of the most disturbing and underreported murder cases in recent memory. Only on this channel do we expose every angle, the secrets, the psychology, the system that failed her. Welcome to Dark Chronicles, where shadows hide the truth. Before she was a headline, Sarah Harris was a rising star. A pageant queen with dreams of becoming a doctor, Sarah seemed to have everything going for her. She was intelligent, kind, and endlessly driven. But beneath the polished image of beauty and ambition was a woman whose life would unravel in silence, shadows, and secrets. In the beginning, no one imagined her name would ever be read in a courtroom. No one expected her story to be dissected on national television. But in January 2022, Sarah Harris was found lifeless on the floor of her boyfriend's home, and her death would trigger one of the most controversial criminal charges in recent Maryland history. In 2020, Sarah needed a routine wisdom tooth extraction. She walked into the office of a highly respected oral surgeon named Dr. James Ryan. To everyone around her, this was a simple dental procedure. But what no one realized then was that it marked the beginning of something far more sinister. Dr. Ryan was more than twice her age, a man with accolades, a reputation for excellence, and, unbeknownst to most, a history with Sarah that went back years. Because according to his own words, Ryan had first noticed Sarah not in his office, but in a local park when she was just 14 years old. He told her mother, years later, that he used to bring his children into the toy store just to see her, that he'd dine at the restaurant where she worked just to have her as his server. It sounded innocent until it didn't. After the procedure, Ryan started texting Sarah. Friendly at first, emojis, simple check-ins, but then something more. He told her he was looking to hire a surgical assistant. She asked, "What about me?" It was the perfect opportunity, or the perfect trap. Sarah got the job. Then she got the car. Then came the luxury gifts, the trips, and the diamond necklace. By the time she moved into his home, the transformation was complete. From patient to assistant to girlfriend to someone seemingly under his control. Outwardly, Sarah's life looked glamorous, but behind closed doors, things were falling apart. In January 2022, Dr. James Ryan called 911. His girlfriend wasn't breathing. He said he was trying to resuscitate her, that it had happened before, that she had a history of mental health struggles, that she stole drugs from his office, that she injected herself. But her family didn't believe a word. Sarah's mother, Tina, knew something was wrong the moment she got the call. It wasn't just a mother's intuition, it was experience. She'd watched her daughter change in the months before her death. Not slowly, but alarmingly. Sarah had grown thin, anxious, erratic. She had bruises on her arms. She smelled like she hadn't bathed. She was no longer the brilliant, energetic young woman Tina had raised. She was someone else, someone fading. When Tina arrived at Dr. Ryan's house that morning, it wasn't grief that took over. It was rage. She screamed. She hit him. She demanded answers. But Ryan stayed calm, too calm. He told her the same story he told the 911 operator. He went to bed, Sarah stayed up, and when he came down in the morning, she was gone. But there were signs that something didn't add up. Tourniquets near the sink, syringe wrappers on the counter, a vial of ketamine in Sarah's purse. Medical-grade supplies in a home that wasn't a hospital. It looked less like a living space and more like an improvised operating room. But still, investigators hesitated. After all, Ryan was a doctor, respected, trusted. He said she injected herself, that she'd done it before. And without solid proof to the contrary, it was easy, too easy to believe him. That's when Sarah's sister, Rachel, stepped in. While investigators were still considering overdose as the cause of death, Rachel was hunting for something else entirely: evidence. She hacked into Sarah's iCloud. She downloaded every text, every voice memo, every photo, and what she found painted a damning picture. In one message, Sarah tells Ryan, "Is it possible to bring home ketamine when you come?" He replies, "Yes, I will bring some home. I love you, baby." Another, "You can give me that injection, right? The one that works in 6 seconds?" He replies, "Let's try it." This wasn't self-medication. This was something darker, a twisted routine of dependency where the doctor played both savior and supplier. Rachel compiled everything, 200 pages of messages, photos, timestamps. She took it to the police. She didn't just hand them a binder. She handed them motive, method, and pattern. She handed them a crime scene. Now, detectives could see it too. The syringes, the ketamine, the saline bags. It wasn't chaos, it was clinical. And James Ryan wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a man practicing medicine in secret, without monitoring, without safety, and without conscience. Investigators concluded Sarah hadn't simply overdosed. She had been conditioned, emotionally manipulated, and physically altered by someone she trusted. They called it what it was: depraved heart murder. A charge so rare, most jurors had never even heard of it. It doesn't require intent to kill, only an extreme indifference to human life. And now, the question became, would that be enough? When Rachel delivered her homemade case file to detectives, the tone of the investigation shifted overnight. This was no longer a tragic overdose. This was a timeline of systematic breakdown, a love story hollowed out by drugs, manipulation, and quiet control. Detective Ian Iacovella was assigned the case, a man who hated loose ends and hated bad people getting away even more. The moment he read the texts and reviewed the evidence, he knew. Sarah didn't die by accident. She died in slow motion, over months of dependency, enabled by someone who should have known better. Step by step, investigators retraced Sarah's final days. On January 25th, just hours before she was found, Sarah sent James Ryan that message again. "Can you bring home ketamine?" "Yes, I love you, baby." But this time she didn't wake up. Ketamine, propofol, diazepam, a deadly cocktail, all present in her system. All drugs James Ryan had access to. Drugs meant to be administered in tightly controlled medical environments, not in a living room. Ryan told police she'd stolen them, that she injected herself, that she had a history. But none of it explained the professional medical supplies laid out with precision. The evidence didn't look like an accident. It looked like a setup. And yet, he wasn't arrested. Because James Ryan was still a doctor. And to many people, doctors don't kill, they save. To charge him, prosecutors would need more than suspicion. They needed to prove that he knew the risk, and simply didn't care. That's where the text came in. Sarah had written, "I've lost my will to live." To the defense, that was evidence of suicidal ideation. To the prosecution, it was the cry of a young woman in emotional collapse, dependent on a man with all the power. In court, the phrase depraved heart murder hung in the air like a storm cloud. It meant recklessness at a level so extreme, so dangerous, that it didn't matter whether Ryan wanted her to die or not. Giving her those drugs, off the books, unmonitored, and potentially while she was asleep, was like handing her a loaded gun. And the prosecution knew it. They brought in witnesses, experts in addiction, abuse, and the power dynamics that trap people in dangerous relationships. They painted Ryan not just as negligent, but as a man who used his title and trust to push Sarah past the point of return. One social worker testified, "He didn't just give her drugs, he gave her dependency. And once she was addicted, not just to the substances, but to him, he had complete control." But the defense wasn't going down quietly. They called friends who said Sarah had used before, that she struggled long before Ryan came into the picture, that she could have taken the drugs on her own. It was a battle of perception. Was James Ryan a careless lover or a calculated manipulator hiding behind a lab coat? The jury had to decide. Then came the text that changed everything. It wasn't just another "I love you" or "bring ketamine." It was Sarah asking James for an injection while she was asleep. The prosecution argued this wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was lethal. Ryan had full knowledge of the drug's potency. In his own clinic, he followed strict protocols: monitors, assistants, oxygen on standby. At home, he skipped every safeguard. He was the supplier, the administrator, and the only witness. In court, prosecutors showed the jury the messages one by one, like loading bullets into a chamber. Can you bring some home? Yes, I love you. It'll make the anxiety go away in 6 seconds. Let's try it. 6 seconds. That's all it took. The defense fired back, insisting Ryan didn't intend to hurt Sarah, that she was troubled, unstable, impulsive, that she'd struggled with mental illness for years. But intent wasn't the point. This wasn't a charge of premeditated murder. This was depraved heart, a crime of carelessness so severe it becomes deadly. The jury didn't need to believe James Ryan was evil. They just had to believe he didn't care enough to stop her from dying. And that's exactly what they concluded. After a nearly 2-week trial, the verdict came in. Less than 3 hours of deliberation. Guilty, not just of drug distribution, not just of involuntary manslaughter, guilty of depraved heart murder. In the courtroom, Sarah's family wept. Tina Harris, the mother who'd once begged her daughter to come home, finally had justice, but no daughter to come home to. James Ryan, on the other hand, looked stunned. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Not in the chair, not in the home, not in the relationship. And as he stood for sentencing, he read a statement to the court. Not an admission, not really. He still denied injecting Sarah, still claimed she had taken the drugs herself. But he did say he was sorry for not stopping her. He called it remorse. The judge called it responsibility, and the sentence made history. But outside the courthouse, the story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. News outlets pounced. True crime forums exploded. TikTok, Reddit, podcasts, you name it. Everyone had a theory. Was Sarah groomed? Was Ryan a predator hiding in plain sight? Why didn't authorities arrest him sooner? And most controversially, should doctors who supply controlled substances to people they're intimately involved with be subject to stricter legal scrutiny? In Maryland, the case sent a message. State prosecutors began lobbying for tougher laws around overdose-related deaths, laws that would close the gray area between dealer and enabler. James Ryan was the test case, and Sarah Harris, she became the face of something bigger than one tragedy. A story not just about drugs or death, but about what happens when trust turns fatal and no one stops it in time. In the weeks following the verdict, the Harris family did what families do after unspeakable loss. They mourned, they searched for meaning, they visited Sarah's grave, where, in a quiet, gut-wrenching decision, they also buried her brother's ashes. 2 siblings, 2 tragedies, 1 casket. And for Tina Harris, there were no illusions. Justice had come. But peace was still a rumor. She said she sometimes hears Sarah's voice. That motherly instinct never turned off. Even now, she imagines her daughter saying, "Mama, it's okay." But it isn't. It wasn't okay when Sarah's cries for help were dismissed as dramatic. It wasn't okay when a man with authority, resources, and training used them not to save her, but to keep her dependent. And it's still not okay that it took a sister-turned-investigator to uncover the truth while the system stood frozen, impressed by a white coat. Rachel Harris wasn't a detective. She wasn't trained in forensics. She was just someone who knew her sister better than anyone. And she did what law enforcement didn't. She followed the digital trail. She built the timeline, and she told the story out loud, page by page. Without her, this case would have been quietly closed as another overdose. Sarah would have been another statistic, blamed for her own end. Instead, she became a symbol, a warning, a reminder that control doesn't always come with violence. Sometimes it comes with comfort, routine, and seduction disguised as safety. And Dr. James Ryan? He became something else entirely. Proof that credentials don't equal character. That knowing better doesn't mean doing better. that even healers can harm. The verdict, depraved heart murder, was rare, controversial, and powerful, and it may be a legal blueprint for future cases where recklessness hides behind charm. But even that couldn't answer every question. How early did it start? Could anyone have stopped it? Would Sarah still be alive if the first warning signs were taken seriously? And then, the hardest one. What do you do with justice when it shows up too late? The story of Sarah Harris forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how society views mental health, about the blind trust we give to authority, about the ways addiction, vulnerability, and power can become a deadly triangle. But it also shows us what resistance looks like. It looks like a mother who fought even when her daughter begged her not to. It looks like a sister who became an archivist of tragedy just to make the world see. And it looks like a jury, 12 strangers, who were willing to say, this wasn't just a mistake, this was a crime. In the end, Sarah Harris didn't get the life she deserved. But because of the people who loved her, she got something else, the truth. And maybe, just maybe, the world is listening now. Detective Ian Iacovello was not new to tragedy, but something about this case kept him awake. Maybe it was the text messages. Maybe it was Sarah's voice in that voicemail, so trusting, so certain. Or maybe it was the way Dr. Ryan had managed to maintain control even after Sarah's death. From the outside, Ryan was cooperative, respectful. He called 911, performed CPR, answered police questions. But to Iacovello, it felt too rehearsed, too polished. So he started picking at the details. The first thing he noticed, the paraphernalia at the scene, didn't match the chaotic junkie story Ryan was selling. Tourniquets, labeled vials, medical-grade syringes, not street drug chaos. This was a doctor's setup, sterile, intentional. And that story about Sarah stealing drugs, it collapsed fast. Sarah wasn't breaking into his office. She lived in his house. She didn't have to steal anything. He had unrestricted access and no real documentation of security. No locks, no logs, no oversight. Then came the autopsy report. Sarah had 3 drugs in her system, each dangerous on its own but lethal in combination. All traceable to medications commonly stored in dental or surgical offices, all linked back to Ryan. Still, Iacovello needed to bridge the gap between carelessness and criminal recklessness. He needed to prove that Ryan didn't just let it happen, but facilitated it over and over again. And that's where the text messages sealed it. They showed a progression. From casual suggestions, I'll bring some home, to clinical precision. Sarah asking for a 6-second fix. Ryan treating her like a procedure. There was no guesswork, no ambiguity. The doctor knew exactly what he was giving her and how it would affect her body. And most damning of all, he didn't monitor her after the injection. Not once. No vitals, no pulse checks, no CPR protocol, just the drugs and distance. To Iacovello, that was the final proof. A doctor who administered or allowed the administration of multiple sedatives without monitoring wasn't being romantic. He was being criminally negligent. He compiled everything, the texts, the photos Rachel had taken, the forensic evidence, and Sarah's own medical history. Then he took it to the state's attorney. The result? A full suite of charges: depraved heart murder, involuntary manslaughter, drug distribution, possession with intent to distribute. It wasn't just about what James Ryan had done. It was about what he failed to do, what he should have done, what any competent medical professional, any human being, would have done if they truly cared about the person lying unconscious beside them. It was one of the rare times that a professional title became part of the prosecution's case instead of the defense. Because here, being a doctor wasn't a shield, it was the weapon. The trial of Dr. James Ryan quickly became more than a local story. It was national news. Headlines splashed across true crime blogs, TV segments, and hashtags crawling through every dark corner of the internet. Not just because of the tragedy, but because of the charge. Depraved heart murder sounded like fiction, a phrase you'd expect from a noir novel or a courtroom thriller. But here it was, printed on charging documents, read aloud to a silent jury. And from day one, the courtroom was electric. The prosecution came prepared. Their strategy? Let the defendant's own words convict him. They projected text messages onto the screen, one after another, like an emotional firing squad. "I'll bring some home. You'll be calm in 6 seconds. I love you, baby." Each one brought a new wave of discomfort. The jurors weren't just listening, they were feeling the manipulation, watching the emotional noose tighten. Then came the expert witnesses. A social worker explained how predators don't always isolate their victims with violence. Sometimes they isolate them with affection. One psychiatrist described Sarah's relationship with Ryan as textbook trauma bonding, where the person causing the damage is also the one offering the only relief. And then Tina took the stand. Sarah's mother described in excruciating detail what it was like to watch her daughter unravel. Her voice cracked as she recounted the day she found needle marks running up Sarah's arms. She admitted she didn't call the police, not because she didn't want to, but because Sarah begged her not to. She said if I turned him in, she'd never speak to me again. In that moment, the courtroom didn't just hear about loss. It witnessed guilt, fear, a mother's impossible choice between protecting her child and losing her forever. But the defense wasn't silent. They argued that Sarah had a history with substances before meeting Ryan, that she was bipolar, that she'd talked about giving up. They even presented texts where Sarah said she'd lost her will to live. In their eyes, this wasn't a murder. It was a tragic suicide. Or maybe an accident, but not a crime. They called friends who claimed they'd seen Sarah used before. Relatives who said Ryan made her happy. A defense expert even suggested that Sarah might have taken the drugs without Ryan's knowledge. But the prosecution had one final shot. Closing arguments framed Ryan not as a man who committed a single fatal act, but as someone who created the entire ecosystem of danger. He didn't just hand her drugs, he handed her trust, intimacy, and control, and then weaponized it. And when the jury left the room, no one knew what they'd decide. Was this truly murder, or just a fatal case of love and care gone wrong? 3 hours later, they had the answer. Guilty. Not just of bad judgment, not just of enabling, but of murder. The courtroom had spoken. James Ryan, once a respected surgeon, a trusted medical professional, a man whose name was followed by the letters DR, was now a convicted murderer, found guilty of depraved heart murder, involuntary manslaughter, and drug distribution. Sentenced not just for what he did, but for how deliberately, consistently, and fatally he did nothing when it mattered most. But even with the conviction, the Harris family didn't get their daughter back. Tina didn't get to see Sarah graduate from med school. Rachel didn't get to hear her sister sing at family dinners. And a young woman whose only mistake was trusting the wrong person with too much will never grow old. Instead, Sarah became a cautionary tale in every sense of the word. To some, the story was simple, a dangerous relationship, a tragic end. But to others, activists, attorneys, and exhausted parents scrolling through the news at night, this case meant something more. It peeled back the curtain on a kind of abuse that doesn't leave bruises, that doesn't scream, that doesn't throw punches. It whispers, it persuades, it rewards. And when it kills, it leaves people asking, why didn't she just leave? When the real question should be, why did no one stop him? Sarah Harris's story sparked conversation across the medical community. Should doctors face tighter oversight for personal conduct outside the office? Should romantic relationships with former patients be automatically reported or even banned? Should there be new procedures for reporting professionals who misuse prescription drugs, not for profit, but for control? Some people said yes. Others said nothing would ever change. But one thing was clear, the illusion of safety that comes with credentials, PhDs, white coats, titles on the door, had been shattered for many. And in the middle of it all, the phrase depraved heart lingered. It's not about hate. It's not even about violence. It's about indifference. The kind of moral vacancy that allows a person to see suffering and shrug. That was the core of the case. Ryan didn't scream at Sarah. He didn't drag her out of bed. He didn't raise a hand. But he watched her deteriorate. He let it happen, enabled it, administered substances meant for surgeries in unmonitored bedrooms. And when she couldn't stand on her own anymore, he didn't catch her. He just stood there. And sometimes that's worse. In interviews after the trial, Detective Iacovello called the case a murder in slow motion. Not one deadly moment, but dozens of quiet, deadly choices. Prosecutors echoed the same. They didn't just win a conviction, they opened the door to a new kind of accountability. But they also knew the bar was high. Depraved heart murder is a rare charge because it's hard to prove. It requires a perfect storm: access, recklessness, harm, and death. And though Ryan fit the criteria, future cases won't be so clear-cut. So Maryland lawmakers began drafting new legislation, stricter punishments for those who supply lethal substances, even without intent, a legal evolution born from Sarah's death. In the court of public opinion, Ryan was already condemned. Social media lit up with commentary. TikTokers broke down the timeline. Reddit sleuths pored over autopsy reports and court transcripts. Podcasts featured Tina's emotional testimony. For a time, Sarah became the story. But viral outrage comes with a shelf life, and when the hashtags faded, only her family remained. The mother who buried 2 children in 1 year. The sister who became a detective. The ex-boyfriend who still plays guitar at Sarah's grave. It's there, among the flowers and fading pictures, that this story finds its true weight. Because justice, for all its noise, is still quieter than grief. Tina once said she used to picture Sarah in a white coat, walking into hospital rooms and calming nervous patients with that bright voice and brilliant smile. She said she doesn't know what comes next, but she does know what Sarah would want. That her story, however painful, however brutal, meant something. So to the viewers still listening, still processing, still maybe wiping away a tear, remember this: abuse doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it wears a stethoscope. Sometimes it says, "I love you," right before it kills. Sarah Harris trusted a man who said he would help her. Instead, he gave her something else: silence. But her voice, through her mother, through her sister, through the verdict, is louder than ever now. And maybe that's not justice. Maybe that's not enough. But it's something.
So that's how crimes end. And if you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the notifications. If you want me to do some special crimes in all over the world, comment down below, or you can send us direct through email, and I will see you in all my videos. See ya!